Hello, hello, hello. It's Nicholas Rosseinsky here with week 11 of the Frontiers of Therapy and Spirituality tour. As usual, the centerpiece this week will be Richard Harvey's Sacred Attention Therapy, or SAT, which you can find out more about at www.centerforhumanawakening.com. And this week we're going to be talking about climate change, which is a ridiculous topic to try and say anything meaningful about in 10 minutes or under. So I'm going to limit myself to trying to illustrate two meaningful contributions that week 4's SAT C++ can make. So this episode continues prior week's explorations of the awakening of matter, this week using climate to illustrate spiritual and scientific contributions in the societal domain. So what is the cause of climate change, if there is one? Of course, there are many partial answers: carbon dioxide, vested interests, fossil fuels, lethargy, lack of environmental concern, and so on and on. And all such answers have a certain validity. But what is the ultimate cause, so to speak, if there is one? Climate change and the larger eco-disaster that it's part of are forms of damage, inflicting suffering on many different life forms. And what is the ultimate cause or origin of this kind of damage and suffering? I suggest that it's week 3's alleged separation or imagined fall, a dynamic that first began over 13 billion years ago and is still going on right now. So to address climate change at its deepest, we should try to down-regulate the breadth and intensity of week 10's split will, which is at the bottom of the illusion of separation, its perpetuation. Now, this is more or less the same as saying that the more awakened humankind is, the less it will participate in eco-damage. And in that frame, it's easy to bemoan eco-disaster as just evidence of our relatively unawakened state. But I want to frame this a little bit differently. So we can see the whole confluence of 21st century challenges, from climate and COVID to inequality, injustice, and dystopian artificial intelligence, as a sort of crucible which can force humanity, if it really wants to survive, into a new movement towards awakening. Again, this is such a complex topic, but very briefly, it can be helpful to frame these issues as a sort of self-punishment. So here, very crudely, the alleged separation is involved in a deep perpetuation of guilt. I'm guilty of wrecking heaven, or I'm guilty of something so heinous that it got me thrown out of heaven, and so on and on. Now, this kind of guilt is typically so intolerable that it gets buried very deep in the so-called unconscious, and in fact, in matter. And then from there, it acts out in all sorts of ways, creating every sort of problem as a kind of punishment. For example, it creates nightmares of a post-death punitive exile to a fiery hell. And then it tries to bring that fiery death into a waking reality, for example, via runaway climate change. So if deep unconscious guilt and punishment is the deep origin of climate change, what is to be done? Again, this is such a complex topic and there's no one answer, but here's a note that I think has been unduly neglected, misunderstood, and misapplied, if it's applied at all. And that is what I call radical forgiveness. So say I'm participating in this deep collective unconscious guilt, and then you come along and we have a relational encounter in which you communicate to me, typically non-verbally, that the thing that I'm guilty about, the destruction of heaven, the separation from real reality, never really happened. Now, to the extent I can receive this communication, typically unconsciously, I will let go of my guilt. If I truly witness that separation never happened, guilt about my part in it diminishes. This is not the conventional form of forgiveness. I did something bad, but you're going to let me off the hook. It's the demonstration that the something never really happened. Now, this is radical in the sense of new and unusual, but it's also radical because it goes to the root, not just of climate change, but in fact of every human problem. Naturally, this brings us to how you or I, in fact, can participate in radical forgiveness. Well, I'll explain that next time when we talk about the essence of SAT, because radical forgiveness is the essence of SAT, in fact. And the recognition of the crucial value of radical forgiveness and of SAT as one vehicle for it is what the 21st century crucible will drive humanity towards. Now, if all that seems a bit esoteric, well, as a complement, let's come right down to present moment Earth. In very concrete terms, what is it that tells us climate change is an existential threat? It's science, of course. Even if we can recognize changes in climate today, and we can, future projections of what's going to happen or could happen depend on detailed science-based quantitative modeling. So this makes science the unambiguous friend of climate action, right? Well, actually, no. Unambiguity depends on the version of science we use. So Science 2, the currently mainstream institutional version we looked at last time, certainly affirms the existence of climate change and can helpfully evaluate policy options and scenarios. But what is Science 2's stance concerning radical forgiveness? As we saw last time, Science 2 denies the reality of deeper consciousness, and so it pushes against even the possible existence of a mode or channel like radical forgiveness. Now, what about Science 2's relation to the spectrum of societally significant worldviews, from indigenous wisdom to non-dual spirituality? And what does it have to say about the version of the Gaia hypothesis that asserts the Earth Mother is a living being, or what I sometimes call soul Gaia? Again, Science 2 conflicts in various ways with all these worldviews, obstructing societal consensus. And it actually denies the existence of a living Gaia, a denial that's arguably a significant cause of the larger eco-disaster which climate change is just part of. So what's to be done? Because we need science to analyze climate change, but Science 2 is extraordinarily problematic in relation to societal and spiritual action channels. So naturally, everything changes if we use Science 5 instead. So Science 5 unambiguously supports radical forgiveness as a way, for example, to liberate and support and nurture the actuality of a living Gaia. And Science 5 is capable of instilling and nurturing a mutual coherence amongst multiple worldviews, fostering climate-crucial cohesion. And these two awakening of matter features, a matter-connected radical forgiveness and a spiritually coherent science, can make vital contributions to putting climate change behind us once and for all. Now, of course, this isn't meant to be a complete climate solution. It doesn't take the place of collective activism or personal behavioral change. But what I'm pointing to today is one neglected note, tone, or theme in climate change, and that is its basic origin in a sort of cosmic disorder. First, the creation of an alleged separation, then of guilt post-separation, and then of punishment post-guilt. Now, given the power of cosmic scale dynamics, perhaps it'd be helpful to add some cosmic scale notes, tones, or themes to our response to climate change. So one of these is radical forgiveness, acting on the cosmic origins of climate change. And the other is Science 5, the first version of science that's really capable of recognizing the cosmos for what it is. Next time, I'll explain how SAT quintessentially is a vehicle for radical forgiveness, and how in certain contexts, SAT C++ can radically supercharge that version or vehicle for radical forgiveness. I'm Nicholas. Thanks for watching. See you again next time.